Alright, so some people have been asking for this. Aokiji at Marineford, what actually happened? So the first encounter that's the most important is going to be the encounter with Whitebeard. Now it actually starts when Whitebeard uses the tidal wave, the tsunami, the big attack, where Aokiji jumps up into the sky and freezes the tsunami on either side in an awesome epic scene. Now right at this moment, while he's airborne, while at a disadvantage, as I've explained many times, that when characters are airborne, they don't have the same mobility they usually do unless they have the capability of proficiently flying. I broke this down in many other videos, but perfect example would be Blackbeard against Law, where when he gets off guard with Law putting his room on him, starts falling through the sky, he gets slammed with the shock willy. When they're on even ground, he easily blocks it and reacts to the attack. Now, there's many more examples you can get into. With that said, you have a situation here where he actually unloads an attack from his airborne position called Ice Block Partisan, to which Whitebeard counters and slams a shockwave toward him. Now, when this happens, it blows through the Ice Block Partisan and actually slams through Aokiji himself. Now what this confirms and why this is super important is because Whitebeard's shockwaves inherently don't affect Logia's on their own. That means he has to be using Haki to affect Aokiji or Akainu, just so you know. So we see that Aokiji gets hit with these shockwaves, completely cracks his ice, but he reforms by the time he lands and freezes the ocean in that moment in an actually amazing scene. And this is exactly how Aokiji would fight at sea. Freezes the ocean immediately and has no visible injuries after this. Then later, of course, when Whitebeard gets off the ship, all three of the admirals block it with advanced armament Haki, proving he has advanced armament Haki emission. We then move to a point where Aokiji was stabbing Luffy. Now when he was stabbing Luffy, he clearly missed his vitals with the first stab, and then afterwards he says a remark like, "I owe your grandfather." Now, after what happened in Egghead, we got much more insight into the relationship between Garp and Aokiji. I think it's clear he didn't really want to kill Luffy. He does say something along the effect, "You made your own choice." But regardless, I mean, if he wanted to kill Luffy, he could have done it on the first attack. That's just the truth of it. The point about this is that Marco comes out of nowhere and kicks Aokiji away. Now, any way you slice it, it's off guard, and off guard doesn't matter whether you have future sight, great observation act or not. I've gone into this in much depth beforehand. Characters get off guard all the time. It's also possible that it's a very easy excuse that he got kicked away from Marco to why he doesn't kill Luffy there, because we see him get slammed into the wall and then he's like up completely fine seconds later, standing behind Marines. He doesn't go right after Luffy again. Now when he's standing behind these Marines, Whitebeard is loading back this attack with the Gura, to which Aokiji jumps into the sky and effectively off guards Whitebeard with an ice ball. Now, ice ball is one of his weakest attacks. We saw it didn't do anything to Garp either, but he froze Whitebeard with it. Whitebeard breaks out of it, to which Aokiji says, so vibrations can't be frozen, right? He should have kind of already had this idea though, because his Ice Block Partisan was easily destroyed by Whitebeard earlier by those same shockwaves, but whatever. He freezes him. Whitebeard breaks out of it. Whitebeard immediately goes to stab Aokiji. Now, as I mentioned beforehand, should be very clear that he's stabbing him with Haki here, given that you just saw his shockwaves have no effect on him. Now, they literally state on panel, he stabbed him with pure Haki. Then they question, is Aokiji dead? To which Aokiji replies, no. Don't be stupid. Like, obviously he's not going to be dead. Now, people think like he's saying no to Whitebeard using Haki just to have no clue what they're talking about, because like I already explained, Whitebeard can't make contact with him otherwise. And it's a situation where he's clearly replying to the fact that they said, is Aokiji dead? He reformed around the attack in a similar light to what Katakuri does in Whole Cake Island, so you could, with a preponderance of evidence, argue that this is future sight here, as he is reforming around a Haki attack. Now, with that said, when he reforms around said attack, he loads down on Whitebeard and has him effectively dead to rights with another Ice Block Partisan. Now, of course, Whitebeard did have pretty good defense against the first Ice Block Partisan, but that's when he got to have an attack off. Here, he is completely exposed as his Basento's out and his other hand is down. Aokiji is right near his face to unload this attack, to which Jozu saves him. So I would say that Whitebeard got completely outclassed by Aokiji in this encounter directly, and Aokiji should have still been at a disadvantage of speed even when using Ice Balls. He was airborne, so it's not the best look for Whitebeard in this encounter. Also, on the point of like people thinking it wasn't Haki, like Aokiji wouldn't need to reform around a non-Haki attack. He could have just let it go through him. It wouldn't have mattered. Move on. Jozu off guards him now. Now some people like lie and think that like there was any long stretch of time where Aokiji was fighting with Jozu. There wasn't. The only attack that Jozu lands on Aokiji is this initial off guard. He does draw a little bit of blood on him. Jozu had to have been using Haki here to do this. The next chapter, like literally right after this, and I've talked about how concurrent events happen in One Piece throughout chapters anyway. Like, things can't all be shown on screen at the same time. So when people are all off the screen, a lot of times at the same time as other things, check out my Kizaru Luffy video for an in-depth breakdown of that, like with evidence in that fight. But in this fight, it happens literally a chapter later. The next time you see Jozu and Aokiji is when Whitebeard has his first heart attack, which is effectively like right after this. Now you could argue like, okay, well, Whitebeard moves on. He does like a few other things. And then he has like the clash with Akainu briefly where there's like 2 attacks back and forth. And then he has the heart attack. So there's like some time that transpires. But it's a situation where like we have no idea what was happening over there. Like you're not going to get any scalable feats off it. For all we know, like Aokiji gets back up to his feet. And the fodder marines that were right around Aokiji could have gone and engaged Jozu first. And Aokiji could have just hung back the way he was doing the entire war, waiting for an opening. There's also other Whitebeard pirates that are standing right next to Jozu. So it's possible Aokiji's fighting multiple Whitebeard pirates all at once. We have no idea if there was an actual scrap that took place, and it's only one chapter that goes by with minimal time in between, and they're cutting back to this interaction. When Marco kicks Kizaru away, they don't actively go to fighting. Kizaru does other things, right? The same way when Marco kicked Aokiji, he didn't actively stay fighting Marco, he did other things. Like sometimes shit just has to progress within the story. So like I said, the next chapter, literally right after, Jozu gets distracted by the fact that Whitebeard had his heart attack and Marco got shot by Kizaru, and then Aokiji just literally one-shots him. Now the funny thing about this is, due to the fact that we see that other pirate there and we see swords of other pirates behind him, we understand the positioning in which Jozu was looking. So if we work off the evidence we have right now, we have Marco coming at Whitebeard from his right hand side. We know that Jozu and Aokiji, last we saw them, were on Whitebeard's left hand side with Jozu's back completely turned toward Whitebeard. So now in this panel, what you basically see is that Jozu effectively turns his whole body to face Whitebeard. Now, if he was directly turned the other way, what's behind him is just his own force and his own pirates, and there's more behind that, as they are on his left hand side and he's attacked by Aokiji on his left hand side. So it's not even congruent to say that he's directly even facing Aokiji here. The angle Aokiji comes in, he almost replaces the pirate that was just there. It's aligning with the fact that Aokiji swoops in from a place of like not even being engaged with Jozu. In my opinion, it's super clear that that's what's happening. And for anybody that wants to mention the dialogue that Aokiji says is like evidence for him fighting Jozu, like looks like you aren't focused. Kizaru basically says the same thing to Marco when we know for a fact he was not previously engaged with Marco. He was fighting just everybody else that was around the area. As he said something along the lines of, all it takes is to be caught off guard to lose, or battles are won and lost in an instant depending on the translation you have, but they're both translations. So in both instances, it's just a situation where the admirals, which they do the entire war, are scanning the environment just to see what's happening, maintaining the position, making sure people aren't progressing too far, right? They understand that Whitebeard's getting apprehended by Akainu at this point, and they catch on to Whitebeard having the heart attack. Boom, we swoop in and take these guys out when it's the swiftest course of action. That's the interpretation I take from this. Maybe I'm crazy. Now, off guard surely amplifies damage and it makes it better for the character, but getting one shot by an off guard attack is not going to be a great look any way you stretch it. Of course, we saw Akainu with the most infamous off guard in the series get off guarded by Whitebeard with what seems to be advanced armament haki times the Gura, if not advanced conquers. But like I said, I explained that the shockwaves themselves won't affect the Logia. He would have just split up when he takes massive amounts of damage, and Whitebeard usually makes physical contact when he uses the Gura in this manner with the bubble anyway. He doesn't hear. It's likely that he was emitting at least something in this panel right here, especially because it did heavy damage to Akainu. Now with that said, Akainu ate that shit for breakfast, got up, ripped off half Whitebeard's face. You then see in a situation with Aokiji where he literally doesn't even use a named attack, he just grabbed him with his palm, which could be the highest potency of base Aokiji, like aside from like what happens with the awakening, because Logias, when they use their palm, like Akainu, he used his palm to carve out Whitebeard's chest. Crocodile uses his palm to like soak out the moisture of somebody. Blackbeard uses his palm to nullify somebody's devil fruit. Palm and Logias could be attributed to being some of their highest potency attacks, but it is unnamed, and he one-shots Jozu to a point where he had to be stretchered out after the fact, and they were questioning whether or not he was alive. He couldn't even get back up the entirety of the war. This is actually a really underrated feat, given that Jozu is stated to have unparalleled toughness, which could be argued to be the highest durability in the verse, because toughness is another word for durability effectively, which could mean that his durability in and of itself, like on a baseline level, is above the likes of even Kaido or arguably even King, if you take that hyper literally. He froze right through you know, somebody with unparalleled toughness. Now you could argue, well, was he in the diamond form when he did it? It's neither here nor there. The point is, this is like one of the most impressive showings in the entire war, given that this was one of the stronger commanders of Whitebeard's forces and just got utterly one-shot completely for the remainder of the war. He was incapacitated in one touch. We move on then to where Aokiji again just takes a back seat for chapter after chapter after chapter, not doing anything in the interim until Ace gets freed. Now when Ace gets freed, Aokiji goes over there with a pheasant beak attack and Ace is able to counter the ice. Now the fact is, we understand that Akainu's magma is able to even burn Ace. Akainu's magma is over Ace's fire. We also know that Aokiji's ice on Punk Hazard is an equal match for Akainu's magma. So we understand that if it wasn't, it would melt. We also know that Aokiji's ice, when he's actually at full power, was capable of leaving an ice burn scar on Akainu, whose body is made of magma, which means the temperature of that ice had to get to a point where it was so cold that it superseded the temperature of the magma on Akainu's body to the point where he could sear an ice burn into his skin. Case in point, you actually see Akainu evaporate Aokiji's ice immediately off of like one touch with Great Eruption when Jozu threw the ice block back at them. It should be logical to assume that Aokiji can manipulate the temperature of said ice. As you see, like I mentioned with Jozu, he's frozen down to the bone, incapacitated for the whole arc. And then they talk about when he freezes Doflamingo, he didn't freeze Doflamingo down to the bone. So there's different varying degrees of potency he can use. Now, again, here, this is going to be a ranged attack he uses against Ace. And effectively, when you're just shooting ice at range at a low potency, obviously because they have to be nerfed at Marineford for this reason, Sengoku mentioned, among the other things we know Aokiji has in his bag, like his ice glove, obviously he doesn't use it on anybody, the power to match a prime, Garb's punching power, ice time, which is like his blitzing attack, massive nerfs that are at play here. But the big thing is like a ranged attack here that's just effectively like one of Aokiji's weaker attacks that's just ice should be able to be countered by fire. It doesn't have anything to do with Ace being relative to Aokiji in any capacity whatsoever. He'd get one shot if Aokiji wanted to one-shot him. It's even funny because there's another prime example of this exact clash taking place where people don't keep the same energy, where Yamato and Kaido's fire and ice cancel each other out. But we know that Kaido can raise the temperature of his own flames to another degree as well. And we understand that Yamato is in no way, shape, or form relative to Kaido at full power either, right? So this is just a throwaway, as I mentioned. After that, all you see is that Aokiji freezes some ice. He doesn't give a shit about Shanks showing up. He goes on pursuit of the Straw Hats either way. He freezes the ocean when they're all there. Him and Kizaru both send attacks out, and then they basically say if they got away, just chalk it up to luck. But that's all he does. He really takes a backseat most of the arc. He one-shot his quote-unquote opponent. He outclassed Whitebeard early on in the war and really had a good showing, to be honest. With that said, Whitebeard was the strongest pirate at that time. People like to go against this, but it is stated outright in chapter 552, Old Whitebeard, strongest pirate, has arrived at Navy HQ. So it's one of the best defeats in the verse, arguably that encounter in chapter 567. Outclassing Whitebeard in that degree. You can get into all the other nuances in it, such as like, you know, Whitebeard being stabbed, but you have characters like Luffy and Katakuri who clipped their feats in Whole Cake Island to such an extent by the end of the fight, it didn't matter that they had mortal wounds. Zoro with Ashura clipping all his feats with Ashura. So you can make arguments for all these things. Characters with wounds consistently show better feats than when they didn't have wounds. So it tells you that it's not something that necessarily has to be a limiting factor on somebody's AP or speed to a degree like that. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. See you in the next one. Peace.